A sampling there of premiers and the Prime Minister as they emerge from their day-long meeting in this building where I'm coming to you from tonight. Welcome back to Power Play. The subject of that meeting, of course, the prospect of devastating tariffs levied by incoming U.S. President Donald Trump, who has threatened now for weeks to impose a 25% blanket tariff on all goods, essentially leaving Canada and heading into the United States. We're going to hear from premiers now. We just heard from Kirsten Hillman, the ambassador, the federal government's ambassador to the United States. We've got the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador here with me live, Andrew Furey. Now, hi, Premier, good to see you.
Hey, how are you?
I appreciate you making the time.
Happy to.
So the clips we were just playing there were from premiers reacting to the fact that you all seem fairly unified in the room, but there's one premier from Alberta who says she can't endorse the federal government's plan because of the sort of issue around energy. You preside over a province that has a lot of energy that goes to the United States. Are you comfortable with the positioning of everything right now?
Well, look, what I would say is whenever you start a game or whenever you start a series of negotiations, you need to start with all the pieces on the board. So by that I mean if you're taking chess as an example, you're not going to start without your queen on the board. It doesn't mean that you use your queen, it means you use your queen strategically, but the queen has to be on the board. So even though I am an energy exporter and it makes up 20% of our GDP, I am content with the strategy that's been laid out by the federal government that there will be a proportional response. By the way, we hope there's no tariffs or taxes to Americans because that's the best outcome in this scenario. But if there is, there needs to be a firm, strong, sovereign, united response to the United States.
And if, in fact, that sort of quote-unquote nuclear option has to be pursued, and you're right, we don't know that it will have to because we don't exactly know. We only know what Donald Trump has threatened. We don't know what's going to happen on Monday. But if, in fact, it does, were there assurances provided to premiers like yourself who preside over those energy exporting provinces that the federal government would act to make you whole, for lack of a better term?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to reveal the private conversations of the meetings, but certainly one of my questions was in the case of impacts to any industry, frankly, energy or otherwise, if the federal government would use all the tools that are not available to subnationals, like monetary policy, access to the Canadian Treasury, to help support not just the industries, but the hardworking women and men in those industries. So that is certainly a source of conversation that is ongoing. We were given reassurances by the Prime Minister that there would be support, as he has been there, as the federal government has been there in times of crisis before, like COVID-19. Just to pick up on the first question, though, I do think it's really short-sighted to begin negotiations with everything not on the table. And I think what you heard today was everyone is prepared in a strategic and united way in the interest of Canada to put everything, their own interests aside, on the table in order to create the best starting point for negotiation.
Are you saying that Premier Smith is not willing to put her own interests aside or her own province's interests aside?
I mean, you would have to ask her that question, but I would say that I don't understand the strategic thinking behind her statements. As an energy exporter, we all export different goods and services, but as an energy exporter, I see that the pain that can come, but we want to not have to face that pain. But by taking that off the table immediately means that we have definitively reduced our negotiating strategy, and I think it's a really short-sighted view. And this is my concern, and it has been from day one in these discussions, that in the interest of solving an acute fiscal economic issue, that we allow ourselves to fall into a trap of having discussions on Canadian unity or Canadian identity. And I'm very cognizant and aware of that trap, and I don't think it's one that any premiers or any citizens, frankly, should succumb to. We're in a very strong negotiating position as Canadians. We can't be afraid to own that, but we can't be afraid to lean into it when negotiating against the strongest economic force in the world.
And I certainly do understand that from where you sit, but I get your point that the federal government has always been there to be supportive, but you're a Liberal.
Not always.
You're more closely.
Not always.
No, in this one, you're saying this federal government. I would pose it that, having worked in Alberta for a number of years, Albertans don't feel the same way. Yep. And Danielle Smith certainly would not feel the same way. And I know there's politics involved in all of that, but I can foresee a scenario in which she thinks that the resources that keep people in her province employed are going to be sold out to their detriment, and they won't be made whole because there have been many instances before where they feel that's been the case.
Sure, and I think every region of the country feels at times friction with the federal government. We have a $1 billion oil find off our shores that was held up by the current Minister of Energy that caused delays in investment timelines, and that's a problem for us in Newfoundland and Labrador. The carbon tax is a problem for us in Newfoundland and Labrador. Equalization is a problem for us in Newfoundland and Labrador. We can all have our friction and our issues with the federal government. In fact, that probably makes us stronger as a country. But when you're starting a negotiation, you don't start by saying we're never going to talk about, you're selling your house, we're never going to talk about the pool, we're never going to talk about the blinds, we're only going to talk about, the living room. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So I think, hopefully, by the way, to be fair to the Premier, she's only commented on the fact that she's opposed to export tariffs on oil and gas. So that's not to say that she's opposed the entire plan has been laid out. So again, I would never pretend to speak for her, but it is in my opinion, everything needs to be on the table. When you're starting negotiating with the strongest economic partner in the world, the strongest economy in the world, it's not to say that we will use every piece on the chessboard, but every piece does have to be on the chessboard for the opening moves.
I heard from you and many of your counterparts, at that press conference about other efforts that are underway to engage, right? Yep. To try and, if at all possible, avoid the application, but even if they are applied to, convince essentially people who would have the president's ear, what do we know to be true, that this is going to be detrimental for Americans and the American economy. The situation domestically, though, for President Trump is different than it was the first go around, right? Like, he doesn't have to worry about re-election. He won a decisive victory. I have not seen, even despite all those engagement efforts so far, his rhetoric calm down at all when it comes to Canada. In fact, it's become more inflamed. Do you think those efforts will be fruitful? Are you worried they will not be?
I'm very worried, and I think it was on your show that I expressed immediate concern with what many took as a joke in terms of the 51st state. I don't appreciate it. It's not funny. And if you look at his style of behavior in the past, he starts with a joke. All of a sudden, the joke becomes, serious questions, and then those serious questions become policy, and then that policy becomes enacted. So I think we have to treat this moment not just in the acuity of the fiscal and economic realities, but we have to treat this moment of our national identity and sovereignty extremely seriously. And you're right, he is not a president who has any accountability. He's not going to seek re-election unless he changes the Constitution. He is someone who's been prone to want to leave legacies. And one of the legacies, I'm certain, would be if he acquired extra territory for the United States, whether that's Panama, Greenland, or others around the continent of North America.
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. Premier Furey, pleasure to have you with us. Appreciate you making the time.
Happy to.
Andrew Furey is the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador.